The ropes bite into your wrists. Smoke curls into your eyes, stinging like fire itself. Behind you, your village crumbles, screaming into ash. You try to run, to fight, to scream, but iron hands drag you toward waiting ships. At 17, your life is over. You are no longer a daughter, a sister, or a person. You are cargo. And this is only the beginning. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The smoke smelled of death. Flames licked the edges of the wooden huts, twisting upward like living snakes. Screams filled the air, thick and choking. You ran, but your legs felt heavy, like they were moving through mud. Behind you, the village you had always known, the home where your mother laughed, where your brother played, was collapsing into nothing. Roofs fell with cracks like broken bones. Livestock ran in terror, their cries joining the chaos. Rough hands grabbed your arms. They were strong, unyielding, and merciless. You struggled, but it was useless. The smell of ash stung your nostrils. You caught a glimpse of a familiar face, a friend, a neighbor, but they were gone, swallowed by the fire or dragged away like you. The Vikings moved with a terrible order, precise and unstoppable. They shouted in a language you could not understand. The rope they threw around your wrists cut into your skin, burning and tight. The ships waited, dark and silent on the water, like predators. Cold air from the sea hit you as they dragged you forward. Your feet stumbled into mud and blood. You tried to remember your mother's face, the sound of her voice, the smell of home, but already it was slipping, fading like smoke through your fingers. One scream escaped your throat, but it was swallowed by the roar of the fire. When they threw you aboard, the sea water soaked your dress, clinging to your skin like a second prison. The cold bit deep, chilling your bones. You fell to the wooden floor of the cargo hold, surrounded by other women. Their eyes were wide, full of fear, sorrow, and disbelief. None of you said a word. The fear had stolen your voices. You were 17. Your life, your freedom, your identity, all gone. You were no longer yourself. You were now merchandise, property to be used, traded, and discarded. Around you, the sounds of the ship creaking and the water slapping against its sides were a cruel lullaby. No one comforted you. There was no safety, no hope. The Viking raid had ended in minutes, but the destruction it brought would last for years. Villages burned, families destroyed, futures stolen. And this was only the beginning of the journey. From the moment they captured you, everything you knew, everything you loved, was gone. You were part of a system, business built on fear, violence, and human suffering. And the world you knew had vanished. The ropes around your wrists never loosened. Every movement pulled at your raw skin. The other women around you moaned quietly, some silent, some crying. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. You learned quickly, crying did not help. Struggling did not help. Survival meant submission. The march to the ships had been long, but the real horror was only beginning. Once aboard, you realized the ship was not a vessel for travel, it was a prison. Open holes in the deck were meant for cargo, not people. 20, 30, 40 women crammed together, their bodies pressed against one another. There was no space to lie down, to sit properly, or to move. The sea rocked and rolled the ship, throwing everyone against wooden walls. The cold spray of the North Atlantic burned your skin. The wind cut like knives. Night brought no relief. The temperature dropped. Huddled together for warmth, the shivering and crying became one endless sound. Food was scraps thrown like animals, dried fish, stale bread, or sometimes nothing at all. Water was barely enough to keep you alive. Lips cracked, throats burned. Hunger gnawed at your stomach, cold and relentless. Seasickness came quickly. You vomited where you sat, but there was nowhere to lean or turn. The smell of vomit and unwashed bodies filled the ship, thick and choking. You learned to close your eyes and pretend it was not there, but it was impossible to forget. The men who had captured you did not hide their power. They moved freely among the women, touching, grabbing, punishing. A single attempt at defiance could cost your life. Others had already learned this the hard way. Mothers were beaten before their children. Resistance meant death or being thrown overboard. Children as young as 5 understood quickly, to survive meant to obey. Days stretched into weeks. You could no longer remember the sun. You could no longer remember the smell of your home. Every hour, every movement, every breath was controlled. The voyage itself was designed to break you, to turn you into property, to erase the person you had been. 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 5, women did not survive the journey. Disease, exhaustion, hunger, cold, any weakness was fatal. Bodies were thrown into the sea without ceremony. Some women whispered of escape, of drowning themselves rather than continuing the voyage. Others fell into silence, surrendering entirely. You felt your own resolve slipping with every wave, every gust of wind, every scream swallowed by the ship. The rope on your wrists reminded you constantly, you were no longer free. Your name did not matter. Your life did not matter. When the first shore appeared, it brought no relief. The land meant new horrors, markets, auctions, more chains, more men who saw you only as merchandise. The journey of the ship had been only the first step in a system that treated women like cattle, something to buy, sell, and use until they were no longer profitable. The weight of that reality pressed on you, heavier than any chain, colder than any sea wind. Survival was no longer a hope, it was a strategy. And the first lesson was simple: forget who you were. Forget your home. Forget that you were human. The ship moored, and the cries of the women fell silent for a moment, replaced by a new, harsher sound, the barking of merchants and the clatter of chains against wooden docks. You were hauled off the vessel, still bound, still bruised, still soaked from the bitter sea. Every step toward the market made your stomach twist. The fear that had been simmering inside you boiled over. This was not the end of the journey. This was only another stage, one far worse than the stormy sea. The market was alive with noise and movement. Merchants shouted prices, buyers inspected goods, and guards kept watch. And all the women, yourself included, were lined up like animals for inspection. Age mattered most. Girls from 12 to 25 were the most valuable. Younger children, the elderly, some were killed on the spot, others sent elsewhere. Mothers who resisted or tried to comfort their daughters were struck down in front of everyone, a warning. You stood frozen, unable to comprehend the full scale of what was happening. Buyers circled, examining hands, teeth, hair, and eyes. They whispered in a language you did not understand. Your body became a measurement of worth, height, strength, beauty, health. Appearance dictated value. Any sign of imperfection, scar, illness, or even a small wound, lowered your price. Some women were branded or tattooed to mark ownership. Mothers and children were often separated because families were inconvenient in this cruel business. The fear around you was absolute. Some women screamed and were silenced with blows to the head. Others whispered prayers or begged silently to invisible gods. You found yourself holding your breath, shrinking into yourself, praying you would not be noticed. Your wrists burned from the ropes. Your body was cold from the sea, weak from hunger, and numb from terror. You were no longer a person, you were a commodity. The market stretched far beyond the docks. Inside, rows of cages and pens held women from across Europe, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Frisia, and beyond. They were all here, in chains, waiting to be sold, shipped, or traded again. You realized that this system had no end. A single woman might pass through multiple hands, bought and sold 4, 5 times. Merchants along the chain took their profit. The market was not chaos, it was business. It was planned, structured, systematic, and entirely merciless. As the sun rose higher, man approached, inspecting you as though you were a sack of grain. He ran his fingers over your arms, checked your teeth, and whispered something you could not understand. You wanted to scream, to resist, but there was nothing to do. Resistance was impossible. Survival meant compliance. Around you, other women had begun to weep quietly, some silently, some in broken cries. By the end of the day, some women were taken away, sold to farms, to households, to men who saw them as property. Others would be shipped even farther, east, south, across oceans to lands you could not name. The market was more than a place, it was a machine. It devoured women, erased their pasts, and dictated their futures. And you understood, deep in your chest, that this was not punishment, it was business. The memory of home, the warmth of your family, the laughter you had known, all of it seemed to slip away. In its place was a new reality, fear, chains, and a knowledge that your life now belonged entirely to others. You could not change it. You could not run. The market had claimed you. The woman who walked away from the market with the buyer's men would never return to her village. Her home, her family, her freedom, all were gone. You were now in the same place, with the same fate waiting. A new household, new masters, new rules. The ropes were gone, replaced by collars or chains, but the chains in your mind were far heavier. Your days began before dawn. The chores never ended. You ground grain with heavy stones until your hands were raw and cracked. You carried buckets of water from streams and wells, each one heavier than the last. You scrubbed floors, tended animals, and worked the fields. The sun beat down mercilessly in summer, snow cut through your body in winter. Every movement, every hour, was accounted for. There was no rest, no privacy, no mercy. The women who came before you had learned the lessons well. Whispering brought punishment. Defiance brought pain or worse. Your body belonged to the household, but your life belonged to no one. You were a tool, a laborer, a machine. Every stitch you sewed, every meal you prepared, every load you carried, added value to someone else's wealth. You were not a person, you were property. Work was not limited to household chores. Wool had to be sheared, washed, carded, spun, and woven. Every cloak, every sail, every garment in the household was produced by your hands. Your fingers blistered, your joints ached, your back screamed from the weight of endless labor. Children born into this life knew nothing else. They carried the burden of work as naturally as breathing. Food was scraps. Sometimes you received the leftover bones from the table. Malnutrition became normal. Your body weakened. Your hair became brittle. Your teeth rotted. Your feet bled from constant work. Sleep was short and broken. In barns or cold corners, you huddled together with other women, seeking warmth that barely existed. The sound of coughing, groaning, and crying became your nightly lullaby. But the worst was not the labor, it was the knowledge that your body was no longer your own. The master of the household could take it, use it, violate it at any time. Consent did not exist for women like you. Husbands, fathers, sons, men who once might have protected you, now looked at you as property. Even the legal wife, the husfreyja, held no power to stop him. Sometimes she took her anger out on you, tormenting and punishing, making you her target instead. Your children, if you had any, would inherit your chains. They would grow up in this life, their identity shaped by captivity. Some were sold away. Some were kept as laborers. Some became concubines themselves. There was no escape. Freedom existed only as a distant, almost unimaginable dream. Rarely, a master might free a thrall, but it was a reward for decades of unbroken labor, a gesture to gain favor or show power. Most women would never experience it. Even the language around you reinforced the truth: you were thrall, fey, property, merchandise. You had no voice, no rights, no personhood. Your days became a cycle of labor, fear, and quiet endurance. Your identity was gone, replaced by your usefulness. Every ache, every wound, every humiliation reminded you of your place. And yet, deep inside, a small spark remained. Not hope of freedom, you had learned better, but memory. Memory of a life once yours, of a family once dear. That spark was all that kept you from vanishing entirely, all that reminded you that you had once been human. Life in the household went on, relentless and unyielding. But the cycle of suffering did not stop with you. Soon, it became clear that your body, your labor, and your endurance were only part of the story. Children were born, children who would inherit a life already stolen. The moment a thrall gave birth, the world shifted. The newborn had no freedom, no choice, no protection. From the first breath, they were property, tied to the same chains that bound you. The master's son, the child of your captor or of another thrall, often became the center of the household's attention. But for the children born from thrall women, there was no such status. They were thrown barn, thrall children, and their future was written before they even learned to walk. Some were kept to grow into laborers like you, trained to carry the burdens of the household. Others were sold at a young age, sent far away to foreign lands, their cries for their mother drowned in the sea of business transactions. Watching your own child struggle to breathe in a cold corner, knowing that their life would be as harsh, as unyielding, as yours, was an agony beyond words. There was no comfort, no law, no hope to protect them. You held them close, trying to give what little warmth you could, but the chains of your own life were heavier than your arms. Every day, the knowledge that their freedom was impossible weighed on your chest, a stone you could not lift. The masters took children as easily as they took women. Some were raised in the household to serve their needs, others were sold across seas, across continents. It was not random cruelty, it was a system, calculated and ruthless. Every child added value or profit, every girl destined to labor, every boy trained for servitude or sold. The market had no mercy, no conscience, and no pause. You noticed how the older children learned quickly. Survival meant understanding fear, submission, and endurance. Small lessons, whispered among themselves, passed down like secret instructions. Do not speak, they said. Do not resist. Do not hope. Their innocence was stripped away long before they could understand it. Childhood was stolen, replaced by awareness of chains, hunger, and powerlessness. And yet, in the small hours of the night, when everyone slept or pretended to, there were moments that pierced the darkness. A child's laugh, small and fleeting, touch of warmth, quiet whisper of love between mother and child, these were tiny sparks in an ocean of suffering. They reminded you that humanity could endure even in the worst conditions. But even those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the constant weight of labor, abuse, and fear. The realization came slowly, painfully, this cycle was self-sustaining. The system did not need raids to continue. The household itself could breed labor, obedience, and control. Children born into bondage were trained to accept their chains. Their mothers could not protect them, and their fathers often did not exist in their lives. They were property from birth, molded to the economy, shaped by cruelty, and crushed by law. You watched, powerless, as each generation was quietly, efficiently molded into the next link in the chain. There was no hope that the cycle would end, no promise of freedom. The children, innocent and fragile, bore the marks of what had come before, carrying the pain of raids, markets, and long ships in their young bodies and spirits. This was the reality. Your suffering was not unique. It was replicated endlessly, generation after generation. Every raid, every auction, every household continued the work of destruction. The chains extended beyond your own life, binding those who had not yet been born. And in that knowledge, the true weight of your captivity pressed down harder than any rope, harder than any blow, harder than the sea itself. The years passed. Your body grew weary. Your hands, once soft and unbroken, were scarred, blistered, and calloused. Your back ached constantly. Your feet carried you over hard floors, rough stones, and frozen earth, always in service, never in rest. The memory of home, the smell of smoke from your mother's hearth, the laughter of your siblings, the touch of familiar hands, had become a distant echo. A spark that remained only in the corners of your mind, fragile and fleeting. But it was not just your life that the chains touched. Every woman around you, every child born into the system, carried the same mark of oppression. Your story was not a single tragedy. It was multiplied, repeated across countless villages, decades, and generations. The raids that stole your freedom, the auctions that stripped your identity, and the household labor that crushed your body were all part of a larger system. A system that had endured for 3 centuries. Some women survived, but survival did not mean freedom. Rarely, a master might grant liberty, often to gain favor, make a political statement, or reward decades of obedience. But for the vast majority, freedom was a word without meaning. Even those who were freed were not truly free. They remained bound by social expectations, by limited rights, and by the stigma of their past. Children born from their bodies continued the chains, inheriting a world built on suffering. You learned the cruelest truth: the Vikings' raids were not random acts of violence. They were meticulously planned. They were business. The system that took your village, your friends, your family, and eventually you, was designed to maximize profit and minimize resistance. Women were the currency. Children were the future investment. Every raid, every auction, every act of violence had a purpose beyond brutality. It was the engine of an economy that relied on human suffering. As Christianity spread, the system changed in form but not in essence. Some thralls were freed, yes, but new forms of bondage replaced old ones. Serfs bound to land, children raised in forced labor, populations conquered and enslaved, all carried the marks of the same human greed and cruelty. The long ships no longer carried hundreds of women across oceans, but the spirit of that system, the commodification of human lives, remained. And yet, even in the darkest chapters, traces of resilience endured. Small sparks of humanity persisted, whispered prayers, secret kindnesses between women, protective gestures toward children, stolen moments of warmth or laughter. Those sparks did not undo the chains, but they proved that even in the worst conditions, the human spirit could endure. Modern DNA shows the lingering traces of this history. Descendants of enslaved women live across northern Europe, their lineage a silent testament to centuries of stolen freedom. You, the girl dragged aboard the ship at 17, may be long forgotten, but your blood, your story, your suffering has shaped generations. The pain you endured, the chains you bore, and the children you carried were not erased. They live on, quietly demanding to be remembered. The final truth is this: the Vikings' raids were not adventures. They were not heroics. They were systematic atrocities, calculated and merciless, built on fear, pain, and profit. And for every celebrated explorer, every saga sung in their honor, there were hundreds of women whose voices vanished, whose lives were erased, whose suffering built the world the Vikings now glorified. You remember the rope cutting your wrists, the flames behind your village, the cries of those you loved. You remember the cold, the hunger, the fear, and the chains. You remember the market, the labor, the children born into bondage. And though your story may not have been recorded in sagas or runestones, it endures. Your suffering was real. Your humanity was real. And history owes you acknowledgement. No tale of glory, no celebration of long ships, no heroic legend can erase what was done. The woman who was captured, who lived in chains, who bore children into bondage, she was real. She suffered. She endured. And she deserves to be remembered, fully, honestly, without sugarcoating or myth.